The restaurant looked calm from the outside, but inside it carried the quiet pressure of something important about to happen. Crystal glasses shined under soft golden lights. The tables were covered in white cloth so smooth they almost looked untouched. Outside the tall windows, Berlin moved in its usual rhythm. Cars passing, people walking, evening air settling over the city. But inside the private dining area, everything felt different. There was tension in the air, the kind that comes when large amounts of money and reputation are involved. At the center of the long table sat a well-known American CEO. He had built his company from nothing into a global success. Magazines often described him as sharp, bold, and impossible to fool. He had come to Germany to close one of the biggest deals of his career, a partnership with a respected German manufacturing firm. If everything went as planned, both companies would expand into new markets. If something went wrong, millions could be lost. He was not alone. On one side sat two German executives dressed in dark suits, their posture straight and formal. On the other side were lawyers and advisors. And between them sat the translator, a man hired to make sure every word moved clearly from English to German and back again. His voice was smooth and confident. He carried himself like someone used to important rooms. Among the waitstaff moving quietly between tables was a young woman who had been working there for nearly a year. She kept her hair neatly tied back and walked carefully, balancing plates and glasses with steady hands. Most guests never noticed her beyond a polite thank you, but she noticed everything. She had moved to Germany several years earlier to study international business. Money had been tight, and when family problems back home demanded support, she left university and began working full-time. The restaurant job paid her rent. It also helped her practice languages. She spoke English fluently, German comfortably, and even a little French. Language had always fascinated her. She loved how small changes in words could change meaning completely. That evening, she was assigned to the private dining room. At first, she focused only on service. Pour water, offer bread, clear plates quietly, keep eye contact brief, stay professional. The conversation at the table sounded serious but normal: numbers, timelines, delivery schedules. She had seen business dinners before. Important people often discussed big plans over carefully prepared meals. But as she refilled glasses, something small caught her attention. The CEO spoke in English, his voice firm but calm. He explained a production target and mentioned a specific number, clear and direct. The translator nodded and repeated the statement in German. The waitress understood both versions. And the numbers were not exactly the same. It was a small difference. Not dramatic. Just enough to make her pause. Maybe she misheard, she told herself. It was noisy. Plates clinked. Chairs shifted. Conversations overlapped. She stepped away and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling. A few minutes later, she returned with the main course. As she placed a dish gently in front of one of the executives, she heard another statement from the CEO. This time it was about contract flexibility. He made it clear that certain conditions were fixed and non-negotiable. The translator smiled politely and spoke in German. Again, the waitress felt something twist in her stomach. The meaning had shifted. The strong statement now sounded softer. What had been non-negotiable became something closer to open for discussion. It was subtle. If someone did not understand both languages, they would never notice. Her heart began to beat faster. She moved back toward the kitchen, trying to stay calm. Maybe the translator was adjusting for tone, she thought. Maybe cultural differences required softer phrasing. Business language could be complex. Still, she could not ignore what she heard next. As dessert menus were handed out, the CEO discussed payment structure. He clearly outlined percentages and deadlines. The translator responded in German with slightly adjusted figures, just enough to change who held the stronger position in the deal. This time she was certain. She stopped near the doorway, pretending to organize silverware. She listened carefully as the German executives nodded in agreement, clearly satisfied with what they heard. The CEO looked confident. He believed his message had been delivered exactly as intended. But it had not. Her thoughts raced. Should she say something? Who was she to interrupt a $1 million negotiation? She was a waitress. She carried plates, not contracts. If she accused a professional translator of dishonesty and turned out to be wrong, she could lose her job instantly. The restaurant valued reputation above all else. She imagined her manager's face if she caused a scene in a private business meeting. She imagined the translator denying everything. She imagined the CEO brushing her off. Still, the feeling would not leave her. She thought about the years she spent studying business before dropping out. She remembered her professors explaining how trust is the foundation of every agreement. Once trust breaks, everything collapses. She thought about how hard she had worked to learn languages properly, respecting their details and structure. Words mattered. Precision mattered. And right now, precision was being bent. She returned to the table with coffee. Her hands felt slightly colder than usual, but her movements stayed steady. She poured carefully and listened again. The CEO leaned forward, speaking about long-term partnership and mutual benefit. His tone was respectful but firm. The translator spoke after him, his voice confident. And once again, the meaning tilted. It was no longer simple misunderstanding. It was a pattern. She stepped back and took a slow breath. The meeting paused briefly as one of the lawyers requested a short break before reviewing final notes. Chairs moved. Papers shuffled. Some stood up to stretch. This might be her only chance. Her legs felt heavy as she walked toward the CEO. She did not want to embarrass him in front of others, so she waited until he stepped slightly aside near the window, looking at his phone. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. He looked up, distracted at first. His expression suggested he expected a question about coffee or service. "Yes." Her voice almost failed her, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I work here. I speak both English and German. I just wanted to say, there may be a small issue with the translation." He stared at her for a moment, not fully understanding. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "Some of the numbers and conditions you mentioned, they were not translated exactly the same." His eyes sharpened instantly. The distraction disappeared. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I listened carefully. I might be wrong, but I believe some key details were changed." He studied her face, searching for hesitation. He saw nervousness, yes, but he did not see doubt. "What was changed?" he asked. She carefully repeated one example. She explained how a fixed condition had been presented as flexible. She mentioned the payment percentages. As she spoke, his jaw tightened slightly. He knew exactly what he had said, and he knew that even small changes could shift the entire deal. "Thank you," he said after a moment. His voice was calm, but there was a new weight behind it. "Please stay nearby." She nodded and stepped back, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it. Across the room, the translator stood speaking casually with one of the executives, completely relaxed. The CEO returned to the table when the meeting resumed. His expression looked unchanged, but inside his mind, everything had shifted. He began speaking again, this time choosing his words even more carefully. He included specific phrases that could not easily be misunderstood. He added exact numbers and repeated them slowly. The translator listened and then delivered the German version. From where she stood near the wall, pretending to arrange glasses, the waitress listened closely. And once again the words came out different. Not dramatically, not enough to cause obvious alarm, but enough. The CEO leaned back slightly in his chair, watching reactions around the table. The German executives nodded in agreement with terms he had not actually offered. The air in the room felt heavier now. The waitress felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear because she knew she had stepped into something serious. Relief because she had trusted her instincts. She realized that in rooms filled with power and money, mistakes could hide easily behind confidence. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room was the only one paying attention. As the conversation continued, she saw the CEO's expression change. He was no longer relaxed. He was observing, calculating, testing, and she understood that whatever happened next, the evening would not end the way it began. The quiet restaurant, the soft lights, the polite smiles. None of it could hide the truth for much longer. A single warning, spoken softly by someone who was almost invisible in the room, had just changed the direction of $1 million deal. The break between courses gave the room a brief pause. The clinking of silverware and quiet whispers of servers were the only sounds filling the space, yet the tension at the table felt heavier than ever. The CEO had stepped aside to check some notes, giving the others a moment to relax, and it was then that the waitress made her next move. She had spent the past hour watching every word, every subtle change in meaning, and she could no longer ignore what she had discovered. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried a tray of fresh water glasses toward the CEO. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that honesty sometimes demanded courage, even if it meant risking her job. She approached him slowly, making sure to stay just outside the circle of other executives. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, almost as if speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate atmosphere. He looked up, slightly annoyed at first, expecting a question about service or a request for more sugar in his coffee. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm but curious. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important," she continued. "I've been listening to the translations, and I believe some of your statements are not being translated exactly as you said them." He raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly?" His tone suggested he wasn't sure if she was joking or serious. "I'm not joking, sir," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Some numbers, some conditions, they're slightly changed in translation. I can give you examples if you want." He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read her intentions. There was nervousness, yes, but there was also clarity and sincerity. He realized that she was someone who noticed details, someone who cared enough to risk speaking up. "All right," he said finally. "Tell me exactly what you noticed." She took another deep breath and repeated the first instance she had heard, the one about the production targets. She explained how a number he had given in English had been altered subtly in German, enough to shift responsibility. Then she mentioned the second instance about fixed conditions that were presented as flexible. Finally, she spoke about the payment percentages, clearly stating what had been changed. The CEO's expression hardened. His calm demeanor remained, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. Every word she spoke confirmed what he had begun to suspect himself. Something was not right. The translator, who had seemed flawless and professional, might not be trustworthy. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice low so that only she could hear. "Please stay close. I may need you in a moment." Her heart pounded in her chest. She nodded and stepped back, pretending to rearrange the silverware on the side table, but she stayed alert. Every word, every gesture at the table was now under scrutiny. When the meeting resumed, the CEO tested the translator without making it obvious. He spoke deliberately, using exact numbers and repeating key phrases slowly. The translator delivered his words in German, but the waitress could hear the subtle changes once again. This time, the CEO's reaction was immediate but contained. He didn't confront the translator openly. Not yet. He began asking the German executives questions that were slightly different from his statements, seeking confirmation. Their answers did not match what he had originally said. Confusion flashed across their faces. They sensed something was off but could not identify it. The CEO leaned back, observing carefully. He did not want to accuse anyone prematurely, not without proof. But he now had confirmation that the translation was not accurate. The waitress, standing quietly at the edge of the room, felt a mix of fear and relief. She had done her part, but she knew this was only the beginning. As the discussion continued, the CEO subtly adjusted his strategy. He began to phrase statements in ways that could be verified independently, forcing the translator to repeat exact numbers and key terms multiple times. He made mental notes of discrepancies, recording each subtle shift in meaning. The waitress followed every word, amazed by how the CEO remained calm under pressure. She could feel the tension in the room growing with each exchanged sentence. At one point, the CEO asked the translator to repeat a particularly sensitive contract clause word for word in German. The translator complied, but But the waitress noticed an extra phrase added at the end, something that slightly weakened the CEO's position. She froze, realizing that the deception might be intentional rather than accidental. The CEO paused again. This time he did something unexpected. He turned to the German executives and asked them directly in simple English to repeat what they understood. Their response revealed the discrepancy clearly. The numbers and terms they mentioned did not match what he had originally said. A silence fell over the table. The German executives exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. The CEO's calm voice broke the quiet. "It seems there has been some misunderstanding," he said carefully, his tone neutral but firm. The translator shifted in his seat, his confidence beginning to falter. The CEO continued, keeping his eyes fixed on him. He was waiting for the translator to either admit the error or continue to try and cover it up. The waitress, standing a short distance away, realized that the moment had arrived. She had a choice: stay silent and risk the deal going wrong, or step forward and provide clarity. Taking a deep breath, she moved closer. "Sir," she said quietly, "if you want, I can translate what you just said exactly as it is into German." The CEO turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead," he said. She repeated his statement clearly, carefully, and without adding or changing a single word. The German executives listened, and their eyes widened as they realized the difference. The room's atmosphere shifted immediately. Where confusion had been, understanding now replaced it. The CEO nodded, silently acknowledging her courage and accuracy. He then addressed the translator directly, asking him to explain why there was a discrepancy between his translation and the actual words. The translator faltered, stammering slightly. Under pressure, his composure cracked. He admitted hesitantly that he had been offered a personal incentive by someone connected to the German side to subtly alter the translation in their favor. He had thought minor changes would go unnoticed, but they had not. The CEO listened carefully, taking in every word. He remained calm but firm, making it clear that any further deception would not be tolerated. The German executives, embarrassed and confused, insisted they had no involvement in the translator's actions. They promised an immediate investigation. The waitress watched, her hands trembling slightly, but her heart swelled with a strange sense of pride. She had stepped into a situation far beyond her role, and her observations had prevented a potential disaster. The CEO took a moment to compose himself. He could have walked away from the deal entirely. That would have been the safer option. But he remembered the months of preparation, the trust built with the German company, and the potential for a mutually beneficial partnership. He looked at the waitress, who was quietly standing nearby, and thought about how often small voices are ignored in high-stakes environments. Sometimes, it is those who are least expected to notice the truth who see it most clearly. He decided to continue, but with caution. He instructed the meeting to resume with a new translator, one chosen independently to ensure accuracy and impartiality. The German executives agreed, and the discussion began again, this time under closer scrutiny. As the new translation moved smoothly across the table, the CEO was able to rebuild the conversation on solid ground. The earlier deception had been exposed, but the deal itself was not lost. In fact, it became stronger because every term was now being confirmed and verified in real time. The waitress, though still nervous, felt a quiet satisfaction. Her decision to speak up had changed the course of events. She had risked her position in the restaurant, and perhaps even angered powerful people, but she had done the right thing. Throughout the evening, she continued to observe, ensuring that each word was clear and each meaning precise. She learned more about human nature, about courage, and about how integrity often requires action, even when the stakes are high. The CEO, now confident that the deal could proceed safely, made a mental note to remember the young woman who had alerted him. He understood that her actions had prevented a serious mistake and possibly saved millions of dollars. In that quiet, elegant room, filled with tension, power, and wealth, a single act of honesty had shifted everything. The waitress had stepped out of her expected role, proving that insight, careful listening, and the courage to act could influence even the most important negotiations. And as the evening continued, the atmosphere began to relax slightly. Conversations became smoother, smiles returned to some faces, and the rhythm of the meeting resumed. But the CEO never forgot the warning he had received, quietly acknowledging the critical role played by someone who, at first glance, seemed invisible. The waitress went back to her duties, but her perspective had changed. She had seen the impact of truth in a world dominated by money and influence. She had learned that even in high-powered settings, the right observation at the right time could alter the course of events, and that courage could come from the most unexpected places. By the end of the evening, the deal was back on track, the translator had been replaced, and trust had been carefully restored. The CEO, now more aware than ever of the fragility of communication, made plans to ensure that accuracy and honesty would guide every step forward. For the waitress, it was a quiet victory. She had acted with integrity, observed carefully, and made a difference that no one else in the room had anticipated. And in that moment, she realized that her role, small as it seemed, had mattered more than she could have imagined. The night ended with polite handshakes, smiles, and farewells. Outside, Berlin's streets glimmered under streetlights. Inside, a young woman had proven that vigilance and courage could influence even the highest levels of business, and a powerful CEO had been reminded that sometimes, the quietest voice carries the most important message. The room had shifted in energy after the break. What had once been a smooth, controlled negotiation now carried a quiet tension, the kind that made every movement and every word heavier. The CEO had returned to his seat, a calm mask over his face, but his eyes were sharp, scanning every gesture, listening to every syllable. The young waitress stood at a corner of the room, pretending to straighten cutlery, while her ears remained alert to every sound. The translator, now aware that his actions had been noticed, sat a little straighter, but his confidence had been rattled. The CEO decided to approach the next part of the meeting strategically. Instead of rushing forward, he chose to test the translator more subtly, speaking in a way that allowed verification without revealing his full suspicions yet. He mentioned specific delivery timelines and exact percentages of payment installments, phrasing them slowly and deliberately. The translator responded in German, as expected, but the waitress immediately caught the subtle shifts. Slight alterations, just enough to appear insignificant to someone not paying close attention, but enough to mislead about responsibility and deadlines. Her stomach tightened. She felt both fear and a strange determination. If she did not speak up, the CEO might sign off on terms that were not what he intended. That could cost millions. And yet, speaking up in the middle of such a high-stakes environment carried its own risk. She reminded herself to stay calm, to act respectfully, to present information without accusation. That way, she would not provoke anger or dismissive reactions. The CEO, noticing the subtle differences, made his next move. He leaned back, his voice steady, and asked the German executives directly, "Can you confirm what my last statement included?" The executives repeated what they had heard in German, confident and polite. But their words did not match his original English statements. A flicker of confusion passed across their faces, as if they sensed something was off but were unsure what. The waitress felt her heart pound. She realized that the moment had arrived where she could make a real difference. She stepped slightly forward, clearing her throat softly. "Sir, if you wish, I can translate your last statement exactly into German," she offered. The CEO turned to her, his expression unreadable but his eyes showing recognition. "Please do," he said. She carefully repeated his statement, word for word, paying close attention to every number, every phrase, every subtle tone. As she finished, the German executives listened with growing realization. The discrepancy was undeniable. Their eyes widened as they compared what they had heard with her clear translation. The translator's face tightened. His hands, which had rested calmly on the table moments earlier, now fidgeted slightly. The CEO looked at him directly, his voice calm but firm. "Can you explain why your translation differs from what I said?" The translator faltered. A small bead of sweat appeared on his temple. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure, but his words stumbled. I thought, Perhaps the phrasing would be more suitable. The CEO did not interrupt. He allowed the translator to continue, listening intently. Eventually, the translator admitted the truth, revealing that he had been promised a financial incentive by someone on the German side if he tilted the deal in their favor. He claimed he did not believe anyone would notice minor changes. But they had. The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained calm. He understood the human tendency to make self-serving choices, even when consequences are severe. He also understood the need to handle the situation without escalating tensions unnecessarily. The German executives, shocked and embarrassed, insisted that they had no knowledge of the translator's actions and promised an immediate internal review. The room was quiet for a moment, as everyone processed the revelation. The CEO looked around, observing the reactions. Some executives were shifting in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Lawyers whispered quietly to each other, reviewing notes. The waitress, though nervous, remained composed. She had already acted courageously once and now felt a sense of responsibility to see this through correctly. The CEO made a decision. He would not abandon the deal, not yet. The months of preparation, the potential for partnership, and the importance of maintaining trust meant that walking away could have serious repercussions. But he also knew that caution was essential. He instructed the German executives to pause discussions while a new, independent translator was arranged. This would ensure that all future communication was accurate and unbiased. As the new translator arrived and began reviewing documents and statements, the CEO and his team carefully reconstructed the discussion. Every key point was confirmed multiple times, numbers double-checked, conditions clarified. The waitress, observing quietly, realized how delicate such negotiations were. One misrepresented word could shift responsibility, change perception, and even alter legal obligations. Her earlier intervention had prevented that possibility, but the process required continued vigilance. During the reconstruction, the CEO spoke with precision, testing the new translator's accuracy in ways that were subtle but effective. He repeated numbers in different formats, used synonyms for critical terms, and asked the translator to rephrase statements in German without altering meaning. Each time, the new translator responded correctly, and the CEO took mental notes, comparing every detail to his original intention. The German executives watched closely, their initial embarrassment slowly turning into relief. They had no involvement in the deception, and the new translator's accuracy restored trust in the discussion. They began to engage more openly, asking clarifying questions and providing detailed explanations of their own positions. The dynamic shifted from tension and suspicion to focused collaboration. Meanwhile, the waitress observed the human side of the negotiation. She noticed the subtle cues. A slight nod that signaled agreement, a raised eyebrow that hinted at doubt, the careful way the CEO measured his tone to maintain authority without aggression. She understood that business at this level was not just about numbers. It was about trust, perception, and human relationships. Her own courage had intersected with these dynamics in a way she had never anticipated. As the meeting continued, the CEO took a brief moment to speak privately with the waitress. He thanked her quietly, acknowledging her role in identifying the discrepancies. "You were right," he said softly. "Your attention to detail and courage just saved us a serious problem." She blushed, surprised by the personal recognition. "I was just doing what felt right," she replied. "Sometimes that is exactly what is needed," he said. "In rooms like this, even the smallest observation can make the biggest difference." The rest of the meeting progressed with careful scrutiny. Each clause, each percentage, each timeline was verified multiple times. The German executives, now fully aware of the importance of precise communication, collaborated openly. The CEO maintained his calm, authoritative presence, and the new translator ensured that every word was conveyed accurately. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had changed entirely. What had begun as a tense, potentially disastrous negotiation transformed into a carefully managed, collaborative discussion. The deal itself, though slightly delayed, was now on track, stronger and more transparent than it had been initially. The CEO could move forward with confidence, knowing that his intentions were clearly understood and that trust had been restored. The waitress returned to her duties, carrying plates and clearing tables, but she was no longer just a background observer. She had witnessed the interplay of human nature, trust, and courage at a high level. She had learned that speaking up, even when it seemed risky, could change the course of events. Her actions had ensured accuracy, prevented deception, and helped maintain the integrity of a significant business agreement. Outside the restaurant, Berlin continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded within. Inside, a young woman had reminded a room full of powerful adults that honesty and vigilance matter, that careful attention to detail can protect millions, and that courage can come from the most unexpected places. As the CEO prepared to leave, he paused and looked toward the waitress once more. He understood that her intervention had been critical. She had not only preserved the accuracy of the deal, but had also exemplified a kind of integrity that was rare in high-stakes business environments. He made a mental note to ensure she was recognized and rewarded, understanding that her contribution was not just helpful but essential. The evening ended with polite farewells, handshakes, and careful smiles. The CEO departed with the knowledge that the deal could now proceed safely. The German executives left reassured that the negotiation was fair and accurate. The new translator, professional and vigilant, continued to facilitate communication. And the waitress, quietly returning to her station, reflected on what had happened. She had stepped into a situation far beyond her role, acted with honesty and precision, and made a difference that no one else in the room had anticipated. She realized that the lessons she had learned about courage, observation, and the importance of speaking up would stay with her far longer than the events of this single evening. In that quiet, elegant room, filled with tension and power, the interplay of human decisions, attention to detail, and integrity had shaped the outcome. A single act of honesty had shifted the course of a high-stakes negotiation, and the impact of that act would continue to resonate long after the dinner ended. The CEO, now more aware than ever of the importance of clear communication and vigilant observation, made plans to incorporate stricter verification processes into future negotiations. The German executives, reminded of the critical role of accuracy and transparency, promised closer attention to detail in all their dealings. And for the waitress, the experience was transformative. She had witnessed the power of courage and integrity in action, learned that even those in the background can influence outcomes, and understood that her skills and judgment had real value. She returned to her work with a sense of pride, knowing that she had made a meaningful difference in a world often dominated by power and money. The night ended, and Berlin's streets glimmered under the soft glow of streetlights, but inside, the lessons of the evening lingered. Honesty, courage, and careful attention had proven that even in the most high-stakes situations, the right observation at the right moment could alter the course of events, and the quietest voice in the room could be the one that carried the most important message. The room was quieter now, but the tension was far from gone. The CEO had spent the past hour carefully observing every interaction, testing the new translator, and making sure that the German executives understood every term exactly as he intended. He knew that even small mistakes could have massive consequences. Millions of dollars, years of planning, and the reputation of both companies were all at stake. Yet, despite the seriousness of the situation, he remained calm, his presence steady, commanding attention without raising his voice. The waitress, who had played such a critical role in uncovering the earlier deception, stayed close by. She had been given permission to remain in the room, and though she tried to act as if she were simply tidying up, her ears were alert to every word. She understood the stakes and felt a quiet determination to ensure that honesty and clarity guided the rest of the negotiation. The CEO decided to take a moment to gather his thoughts. He leaned back slightly, looking at the documents in front of him. Each page contained numbers, timelines, and responsibilities. He had spent months preparing for this deal, traveling between offices, conducting meetings, and negotiating terms. Now, a single translator's dishonesty could have derailed everything. But instead of panicking, he chose to focus on solutions. He called a brief pause, signaling to the German executives and lawyers that a short recess was necessary. Everyone nodded, understanding that something important was being addressed. The CEO rose slightly, making his way to the corner of the room where the waitress stood. "You did well," he said quietly, speaking directly to her. "You were right to speak up. If you hadn't, this could have gone very badly." She felt a flush of pride but also a sense of responsibility. "I just noticed the differences, sir. I couldn't ignore them." "That's exactly why you were right," he replied. "Attention to detail matters more than people realize, especially when trust is on the line." The waitress nodded, feeling reassured. Her heart still raced, but she felt that her actions had meaning beyond her expectations. She had acted honestly, and it had already made a significant impact. When the meeting resumed, the CEO took a new approach. He began to rebuild the negotiation from the ground up, carefully guiding each discussion point. Every number, timeline, and condition was repeated and verified by the new translator. The German executives listened more attentively, clearly aware of the importance of precision. The CEO's calm confidence helped to reset the energy in the room. Where confusion and tension had dominated, clarity and focus began to take hold. The CEO decided to test a few critical clauses further. He asked specific questions about production deadlines, requesting that the German executives explain their understanding of each timeline in detail. As they responded, he compared their answers to the original agreements, ensuring there were no discrepancies. Each time, the new translator faithfully conveyed his words, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The waitress continued to observe quietly, noticing small details others might miss. She saw the slight hesitation when one executive realized a previous misunderstanding, the subtle nods when another confirmed a timeline, and the careful way the CEO maintained eye contact without intimidating anyone. She realized that high-level business was as much about human interaction as it was about numbers. Understanding people, observing behavior, and paying attention to subtle signals could make the difference between success and failure. At one point, the CEO paused and asked the German executives to review a section of the contract that had previously been affected by the translator's deception. They read it carefully, cross-checking figures and conditions. A few corrections were suggested, and the CEO listened patiently, considering each point. He acknowledged their input where appropriate, reinforcing a sense of collaboration rather than confrontation. The waitress felt a sense of relief. The deal was being reconstructed fairly, accurately, and with the input of everyone involved. The tension in the room, while still present, had shifted from suspicion to careful collaboration. She realized that trust could be rebuilt if approached with patience and clarity. As discussions continued, the CEO began to address broader aspects of the partnership. He spoke about long-term goals, potential expansions, and shared values. His language was precise, ensuring that every term was clear and could be independently verified. The new translator faithfully communicated his words, and the German executives responded in kind. The meeting became less about confrontation and more about mutual understanding and shared vision. The waitress noticed small moments of human connection that often go unseen in business. One executive smiled briefly when the CEO acknowledged a concern about quality control. Another nodded appreciatively when a timeline adjustment was made that would benefit both parties. These subtle gestures reminded her that even in high-stakes negotiations, human empathy and respect played a crucial role. After several hours, the CEO called another short break. He stepped aside, taking a quiet moment to reflect on the progress. The deal, once on the brink of collapse due to a single individual's deception, was now moving forward with accuracy and trust restored. He knew that this outcome required more than strategy. It required attention, vigilance, and the courage of a young waitress who had spoken up when it mattered most. He approached her again, quietly and with genuine appreciation. "You've been remarkable," he said. "Your awareness and courage changed the course of this negotiation. I want you to know that your role here matters." She smiled modestly, unsure how to respond. "I just did what I thought was right," she said softly. "And that's exactly why it mattered," he replied. "Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, careful, and principled. You've shown both." The waitress felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had started the evening simply doing her job, serving drinks and clearing plates. Yet her observations had influenced a process far beyond her initial role. She realized that integrity, attention to detail, and the courage to speak up could have an impact far greater than expected. When the meeting resumed for the final phase, the CEO began guiding the conversation toward closing terms. Each clause was read aloud, numbers confirmed, and timelines verified. The German executives engaged actively, asking questions and offering clarifications. The atmosphere had shifted from distrust to collaboration, and even the lawyers seemed to relax slightly as clarity prevailed. The waitress observed the final adjustments, noting how carefully everyone measured their words and actions. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the outcome would now be fair and precise. The CEO's calm leadership, combined with her earlier intervention, had ensured that no further misunderstandings could undermine the agreement. As the discussion neared its conclusion, the CEO summarized the final terms, repeating key points slowly to ensure understanding. The German executives confirmed each item, their tone polite and cooperative. The new translator repeated everything accurately, leaving no room for doubt. The deal was now ready to be finalized. Everyone present had contributed to its reconstruction, but the CEO knew that its stability depended on vigilance and careful observation. He glanced at the waitress, acknowledging silently the role she had played in uncovering the initial discrepancies. Her courage had been instrumental in restoring trust and ensuring accuracy. When the meeting finally concluded, the CEO stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for your cooperation," he said. "This deal represents not just numbers and contracts, but mutual respect and understanding. Accuracy and integrity are essential, and today we've seen the importance of both." The German executives nodded, acknowledging the sentiment. Even the translator, now aware of the consequences of deception, remained quiet but attentive. The lawyers began finalizing documents, confident that the terms reflected the true intentions of both parties. The waitress returned to her station, carrying dishes with steady hands, but her mind was full of reflection. She had witnessed the power of honesty, the importance of vigilance, and the impact of courage in a high-stakes environment. She realized that even those who seem invisible can influence critical outcomes when they act with integrity. Outside, Berlin's evening continued with its usual rhythm. Cars passing, pedestrians walking, lights reflecting on wet streets. Inside the restaurant, a complex negotiation had been transformed into a fair, accurate, and collaborative agreement. A young woman, quietly observing and acting when necessary, had ensured that the truth prevailed. The CEO, reflecting privately, understood that the evening had taught him valuable lessons. High-level negotiations required more than knowledge and strategy. They required attention, careful observation, and the courage to act on what is right. And sometimes, the most important insights came from those least expected to notice. As the room emptied and the night drew to a close, the waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had acted honestly, spoken up when it mattered, and influenced the outcome of an important agreement. She had learned that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper can change everything. The deal, once threatened by deception, now stood on solid ground. Trust had been restored, clarity ensured, and the process strengthened. The CEO and the German executives had navigated a delicate situation, guided by truth and careful attention. And the waitress, who had once simply carried glasses and plates, had become an unexpected guardian of integrity, proving that even small voices can have a powerful impact. The evening ended with a sense of quiet resolution. Lessons had been learned, trust had been rebuilt, and a young woman's courage had reminded everyone that honesty and vigilance are essential, no matter the stakes. The room, once tense and uncertain, now carried a sense of accomplishment and respect. And for the waitress, this night would remain a defining moment, a reminder that courage, integrity, and careful observation can truly make a difference, even in the most unexpected places. The deal was finally complete. The CEO sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the evening slowly lifting. What had started as a routine dinner in a luxury Berlin restaurant had turned into one of the most important nights of his career. He had come expecting a smooth negotiation, confident in his preparation and experience, but the discovery of the translator's dishonesty had changed everything. Now, after hours of careful discussion, verification, and collaboration, the contract was solid. Every number was correct, every timeline agreed upon, and every term clarified beyond dispute. The German executives were visibly relieved. They shook hands, offering polite smiles and nods, acknowledging the effort it had taken to rebuild trust and ensure accuracy. They understood that the initial deception could have had serious consequences and appreciated the CEO's careful handling of the situation. Even the lawyers, who had been tense throughout the night, now relaxed slightly, their focus shifting to the final paperwork. The CEO allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought about how the evening had unfolded and the lessons he had learned. Experience alone was not enough to guarantee a smooth negotiation. Vigilance, attention to detail, and the courage to speak up mattered as much as any contract clause or financial calculation. And as he scanned the room, he saw the young waitress who had played a pivotal role. She stood near the side table, organizing silverware, her posture calm, though he knew she had been deeply involved in the events that had prevented disaster. He motioned for her to come forward. She approached cautiously, uncertain why the CEO had singled her out. He studied her quietly for a moment, then spoke with a sincerity that made her heart race. "I want to thank you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your observations tonight were critical. You noticed discrepancies that could have cost millions, and you spoke up when it mattered most. That takes courage, awareness, and integrity." She felt her cheeks warm. I was just doing what I thought was right," she said softly. "And that is exactly why it mattered," he replied. "You acted when it was necessary, and you did so respectfully and accurately. You've reminded all of us that even the smallest voice can have a tremendous impact." The waitress swallowed, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had spent the evening simply doing her job, carrying trays and refilling glasses, never imagining that her skills and attention to detail would influence the outcome of a multi-million-dollar deal. Yet here she was, being acknowledged by a man whose reputation and experience spanned continents. The CEO paused, considering how best to express his appreciation. "I want you to know," he continued, "that your courage hasn't just saved this deal. It's changed how I view attention, honesty, and responsibility in all my negotiations. You have a rare gift. I hope you recognize it in yourself." She nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She had acted honestly and carefully, and now she realized the true impact of her actions. She had helped restore clarity and trust to a complex negotiation. More importantly, she had done it with integrity, showing that courage often comes from paying attention, speaking up, and acting responsibly, even when the stakes are high. The CEO looked around the room, acknowledging the German executives and the new translator, who had faithfully communicated every term. He understood that collaboration and trust had been rebuilt, not through confrontation alone, but through careful observation, respectful communication, and a shared commitment to accuracy. The evening had been a testament to the power of human diligence and integrity. As the meeting concluded, the CEO decided to make a small but meaningful gesture. He invited the waitress to join him for a brief walk outside the restaurant. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant sounds of Berlin's streets, footsteps, cars, and the quiet hum of the city. He spoke quietly, sharing his thoughts on the evening's events. "You've shown remarkable awareness and courage," he said. "Many people in your position would have stayed silent. But you acted. You influenced events in a way few people could. That's not just impressive. It's rare." The waitress listened, absorbing every word. She had never expected recognition beyond a polite thank you. Yet here was someone of immense experience acknowledging her judgment and character. "I want to offer you an opportunity," he continued. "Our company has a European office that works closely with international partners. We value people who are observant, honest, and capable of acting under pressure. I'd like to offer you a position there as a junior cultural and language advisor. It's entry-level, but it comes with mentorship, training, and a chance to grow into roles that influence decisions at high levels. Her eyes widened. She had spent years working hard, studying languages, and navigating challenges. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say you're willing to take the opportunity, the CEO replied with a gentle smile. I think you'll find it rewarding. You've already proven your value tonight. Imagine what you could achieve with training and guidance. She felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. The job represented a chance to step out of the restaurant and into a world where her skills, intelligence, and courage could have a lasting impact. More importantly, it was validation that her integrity mattered, that careful attention to detail and the willingness to act could open doors she never imagined. The CEO noticed the change in her demeanor and smiled. Remember, he said, it's not just about knowledge or skill. It's about awareness, honesty, and courage. Those qualities guide decisions in ways that even the smartest strategies cannot. You've demonstrated all three. As they returned to the restaurant to gather the remaining documents, the waitress felt a sense of purpose she had never known. The evening had begun as a routine work shift, but it had transformed into a defining moment in her life. She had acted with integrity, influenced important decisions, and now had the opportunity to grow into a role where her skills could make a lasting impact. The German executives, having seen the resolution and the transparency of the new negotiations, expressed their appreciation for the restored accuracy. Handshakes and polite words concluded the evening, and the lawyers finalized the paperwork with confidence. Every element of the contract was now accurate, fair, and confirmed by all parties. The CEO made a final note of the lessons learned. Vigilance, attention to detail, and the courage to speak up were just as important as preparation and strategy. He had been reminded that even small voices could carry the truth, and that integrity and honesty were essential at every level of business. The events of the evening would stay with him, shaping how he approached negotiations in the future. For the waitress, the night had been transformative. She had witnessed the subtle interplay of human behavior, trust, and responsibility. She had acted when it mattered most, ensuring that the outcome was fair and accurate. She had learned that integrity, observation, and courage could influence events far beyond what anyone might expect. And now, she had the opportunity to continue applying these qualities in a professional environment that valued her contributions. As she left the restaurant with the CEO, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Her path was changing. She would no longer be a quiet observer, but an active participant in a world where her decisions and insights could influence significant outcomes. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the years of study, the challenges she had faced, and the courage to speak up when she noticed something wrong. The CEO, walking beside her, shared his perspective on how high-stakes negotiations worked, emphasizing the importance of clarity, observation, and ethical action. She listened intently, absorbing lessons that would guide her in the role he had offered. It was a rare opportunity to learn directly from someone with decades of experience, and she recognized its significance. Over the following weeks, she transitioned into her new role. She received mentorship and training, learning how to navigate complex international communications, verify details, and provide guidance in negotiations. Her natural ability to observe and analyze, combined with the practical experience she had gained in the restaurant, allowed her to grow quickly. The CEO frequently referenced the Berlin meeting as a case study for his team, emphasizing the critical role that honesty and vigilance played in successful business dealings. He reminded them that even the smallest observations could prevent significant errors, and that courage and integrity were invaluable qualities at every level of an organization. For the waitress, now starting her new career, the lessons of that night remained vivid. She understood the value of her skills and the importance of acting with integrity. She recognized that courage does not always roar loudly. Sometimes it is quiet, careful, and principled, and that kind of courage can change the course of events, influence decisions, and open doors to unexpected opportunities. The story of that night, the exposure of deception, the careful reconstruction of the deal, and the acknowledgement of her courage became a turning point. It demonstrated how honesty, attention to detail, and the willingness to act, even in a position where one might feel invisible, could have profound consequences. As she looked back on her journey, she realized that the events in the Berlin restaurant had done more than preserve a multimillion-dollar deal. They had revealed her own capacity for courage, integrity, and impact. She had stepped forward when it mattered most, and in doing so, had changed not only the outcome of a high-stakes negotiation but also the trajectory of her own life. The CEO, reflecting on the evening and her contributions, understood that true value in business often comes from unexpected places. He had been reminded that vigilance, honesty, and courage could come from the quietest voices in the room, and that recognizing and empowering those voices was essential for long-term success. In the months that followed, the waitress flourished in her new role. She applied her skills with care and precision, guiding communications, verifying information, and assisting in high-level negotiations. Her experience in the restaurant, where observation and integrity had made a tangible difference, proved invaluable. She continued to grow, confident in the knowledge that her actions could influence significant outcomes. And through it all, she never forgot the moment when she had spoken up in that tense Berlin meeting. It had been a turning point, not only in a deal that could have gone wrong but in her own life. Her courage and careful attention had been recognized, rewarded, and had opened doors to a future she had once only dreamed of. That evening in Berlin became a story she would carry forever. A reminder that integrity matters, that attention and vigilance can prevent mistakes, and that sometimes the quietest, most careful voice is the one that changes everything. It had been more than a night of negotiation. It had been a night that revealed the power of courage, honesty, and human insight, and the incredible difference one person can make when they act with integrity.